She sent the photo at 11:47 on a Tuesday night. A mirror selfie, posed and deliberate, the kind a woman takes when she wants to be seen. The mistress stood in the center of the frame, wearing almost nothing, one hand on her hip, eyes locked on her own reflection like she was already celebrating. But she made one mistake. In the background, half-shadowed and completely unbothered, stood Kang Tae-hyun, Amara's husband, fastening his cufflinks with the calm of a man who had never once feared consequences. The message attached read, "He came to me tonight. He always comes to me." Amara Brooks read it once, set the phone face down on the marble counter, filled a glass of water, drank it slowly. Then she picked the phone back up and studied every inch of that photograph. If you've ever been handed a moment that split your life into before and after, drop your city in the comments. And if this story already has you, hit that like button and subscribe. Because what this woman does next is something nobody saw coming, least of all, her husband. The penthouse was quiet, the way expensive places always are. Not peaceful, just insulated. 42 floors above Seoul, the city hummed and pulsed below like a living thing. But up here the air was still and the windows were thick and nothing from outside was allowed in unless someone chose to let it in. Amara had chosen this apartment, had approved every fixture, every sightline, every lock on every door. She'd done it the same way she did everything, methodically, without drawing attention to the fact that she was the one doing it. She was 41 years old, 5'8". She had the kind of face that made people look twice, not because it was traditionally beautiful, but because there was something behind the eyes that didn't quite match the stillness of the rest of her. Like watching a lake and slowly realizing the water is much deeper than it looks. She had met Kang Tae-hyun 9 years ago in New York at a financial summit she'd attended under a cover identity. So clean it had taken even her own people 3 passes to verify it. He was 35 then, sharp and magnetic, and he'd walked toward her across a hotel ballroom with the easy confidence of a man used to getting what he wanted. He was handsome in that deliberately constructed way, tailored suit, careful hair, a jaw that looked like someone had engineered it. He'd said something clever. She'd smiled, which was not the same as being impressed, but something about him had caught her attention, and Amara didn't ignore things that caught her attention. 3 years of careful courtship, then marriage, then soul. She had told herself it was a choice. She'd believed that for longer than she should have. Now she stood in the kitchen of the penthouse they shared, in a silk robe the color of storm clouds, and she was looking at a photograph of her husband in another woman's bedroom. She did not cry. She did not throw the phone. She did not call anyone. She sat down at the kitchen island, set the phone on the counter in front of her, and she looked at the image the way she had been trained since childhood to look at problems. Clinically, completely. The woman in the photo was young, mid-20s at most, pretty in an obvious way, the kind of prettiness that requires effort and a ring light. Long dark hair, expertly done makeup even at that hour, the body language of someone performing confidence rather than feeling it. She'd clearly staged the shot. The angle was too calculated for it to be casual. Amara noted that. She noted other things too. The wallpaper behind the woman, pale gold, textured, the kind she'd seen before. The bedside lamp, brushed brass. The partial view of a window and the specific angle of city lights beyond it. The hem of the white duvet visible at the lower edge of the frame. She noted Tae-hyun, the way he stood, weight forward, shoulders loose, not tense, not guilty. Comfortable. Like he'd been there before. Like wherever he was at home. That detail sat in her chest heavier than anything else. She had spent 3 years building a life beside this man, had cooked in this kitchen, had fought with him about small things, the way he left cabinet doors open, the way he went quiet when he was stressed instead of talking, the way he sometimes looked at her across a room full of people and smiled like she was the only one in it. She had thought that smile meant something. The phone screen went dark. She tapped it back on. 11:47 p.m. He told her he had a late dinner with a business associate. He'd kissed her forehead before he left. She'd been reading when he kissed her forehead, and she hadn't looked up from the page, and now she was looking at a photograph that told her exactly what kind of business he'd been conducting. She turned the phone over and set it face down again. Then she got up, went to the window, and looked out at Seoul for a long time. The thing about being raised inside a criminal dynasty, a real one, not the television kind, was that it taught you early that emotion was information, Rage told you what you valued. Fear told you what you stood to lose. Grief told you what had already been taken. The lesson wasn't to suppress those things. The lesson was to let them register, name them accurately, and then decide what to do with them before the emotion decided for you. Her mother had taught her that. Her grandmother before her. A line of women who had survived by knowing the difference between feeling something and being controlled by it. Amara stood at the window and she let herself feel it. The ache was specific. Not surprise, she would be honest with herself about that. There had been signs she'd cataloged and then set aside because setting them aside had been easier than following them to their conclusion. The late evenings that ran later than they used to, the way his phone had started going face down on the dinner table, the slight shift in the quality of his attention when he was with her, like part of him was somewhere else even when his body was present. She had noticed all of it, had chosen not to investigate. That choice sat with her now. Not guilt, exactly. More like recognition. She had allowed herself a form of willful blindness because she had wanted the version of this marriage she'd built in her head to be real. She turned from the window. She went back to the kitchen. She poured herself 2 fingers of bourbon, the one she kept on the second shelf, the one she never offered to guests, and she sat back down and unlocked the phone. She read the message again. He came to me tonight. He always comes to me. The woman who sent this knew Amara's number. That was deliberate. This wasn't an accident or a misdial. This was a message constructed to land exactly the way it landed, a provocation dressed as confession. The mistress wanted Amara to see this, wanted her to feel it, wanted her to react. Amara sipped her bourbon and considered what kind of woman sends a text like this. Young, ambitious, probably convinced that Tae-hyun had told her things, confidences, complaints about his marriage, the small domestic cruelties that unhappy spouses weaponize against each other in the dark. The mistress believed she had information, believed that information was power, believed she was sending this message from a position of strength. She didn't know. That was the first thing. She didn't know who she had sent it to. Amara set the phone down again and finished the bourbon. Her hands were steady. She noticed that, acknowledged it, moved on. She went to the bedroom. The room was pristine, unchanged. His side of the bed was made. He hadn't come home yet. She sat on her side and reached under the mattress, not in the obvious place, and her fingers found the thin edge of the locked case she kept there. She didn't open it, just rested her fingertips against it for a moment. Then she got up, went to the bathroom, washed her face with cold water, and looked at herself in the mirror. She looked tired. She looked exactly her age. She looked, she thought, like a woman who had just remembered something important about herself that she'd spent 3 years letting herself forget. She dried her face. She went back to the kitchen. She opened her laptop. She had a contact. She had many contacts, but this one was specific, the kind of resource you maintained quietly and hoped you never needed. And she sent a single message. I need eyes on the CO residence. Standard package. 48 hours. She didn't know the mistress's name yet. CO was the building. She'd identified it from the window angle in the photograph. She would have the name within the hour. She was right. 53 minutes later, a file arrived. Yuna CO, 24 years old. A social media influencer with 300,000 followers and a lifestyle far beyond what her disclosed income could support. The apartment, the one visible in the photograph, was registered under a shell company she wouldn't have been sophisticated enough to set up herself. Someone else had arranged it. The car she'd posted about last month. The vacations. Amara read through the files slowly, the way she read everything, the way her father had taught her to read intelligence reports, not looking for what confirmed what she already thought, but looking for what she didn't expect. She found it on page 3. Yuna Seo had made contact 6 months ago with a man named Shin Do-hyun. He operated in a specific corner of Seoul's underground economy. Not drugs, not violence. Information. He bought it, packaged it, sold it to whoever could afford his fees, and he was careful enough that he'd managed to stay anonymous for the better part of a decade. Amara looked at that detail for a long moment. Then she checked the timestamp on the photograph Yuna had sent her. 11:47 p.m. She checked the timestamp on Yuna's last interaction with Shin Do-hyun, pulled from intercepted communication logs she had standing access to through a channel Tae-hyun had never known existed. 6 hours ago. This afternoon. Yuna hadn't sent that text out of jealousy or spite or heartbreak. She'd sent it under instruction. The photograph was a test, or an opening move. Someone was using the affair not as a personal weapon, but as a professional one. Amara closed the laptop with care. She sat very still in the kitchen for almost a full minute. This was no longer about her husband cheating. This was something older and more dangerous. Someone probing the syndicate's vulnerabilities through its most intimate door. Using a young woman who was probably in over her head. Using Tae-hyun's weakness to find Amara's. The assumption, clearly, was that Amara Brooks was the wife, the background figure, the woman who would be destabilized by a photograph, who would make noise or make demands, or do something visible and emotional and trackable. They did not know about her family. They did not know what she was. She pulled out a second phone, a different one, older, encrypted, and composed a message to a number she had memorized and never written down. Activate monitoring, full spectrum, priority 1. I want Shin Do-hyun's network mapped in 72 hours, and I want to know who's paying him. She sent it. Then she sat back. The apartment was still quiet, still insulated, still 42 floors above a city that kept moving regardless of what happened inside the lives stacked above it. Tae-hyun would come home in an hour, maybe less. He would smell like someone else's space, a different soap, a different air. He would kiss her forehead or he wouldn't. He would tell her the dinner ran late, and she would nod. And he would believe she had accepted the lie, the way he'd believed it for 6 months. She would let him believe that. For now. She needed him calm and unsuspecting while she mapped what was actually happening. Confronting him tonight would be a release of pressure, natural, human, understandable, but it would also signal to whoever was watching that the photo had hit its mark. It would telegraph exactly what she knew and when she knew it. So she would not confront him tonight. She opened the first phone again, looked at the photograph one more time, looked at the woman in it, the staged confidence, the deliberate pose, the celebration in her eyes. Looked at her husband in the background, cufflinks, comfortable, a man who had let himself believe he was the most powerful person in any room he walked into. She had let him believe that. She had decided 3 years ago to let him believe it because it had made the marriage work. Because she had wanted the marriage to work. Because she had wanted, in the way even the most careful people sometimes want things, to be just a woman who loved someone rather than what she actually was. She locked the phone. She heard the elevator engage, the specific sound of it, the one she'd learned years ago, and she knew it was him. She knew the weight of his footstep in that elevator, the particular way it sounded when it was him and not security or staff. She closed her laptop, straightened a paper on the counter that didn't need straightening, picked up the book she'd left on the island hours ago. She was reading when the door opened. "Still up?" Tae-hyun said, dropping his keys in the bowl by the door. She looked up from the page. He looked slightly tired, his jacket folded over one arm, his collar loosened. He looked like a man coming home from a long evening. He looked like her husband. "Couldn't sleep," she said. Her voice was even. "How was dinner?" "Long." He ran a hand through his hair, a familiar gesture. The Choi group kept going in circles. "You know how they are." She nodded. "You want tea?" "No, I'm—" He stopped, seemed to really look at her for the first time. Something crossed his face. A flicker of something. Maybe guilt. Maybe just exhaustion. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," she said. "I'm just reading." He looked at her for another second. Then he nodded. He crossed and kissed the top of her head, and she felt the warmth of it and the wrongness of it at the same time, the way two things that should have been incompatible somehow occupied the same moment. "Come to bed soon," he said. He walked toward the bedroom. She waited until she heard the bathroom door close. Then she looked down at the page of her book. She hadn't been reading. She hadn't taken in a single word. She closed it. She sat in the kitchen of the apartment she had chosen, in the marriage she had built, in the life she had constructed with her own hands across 2 continents and 3 decades of careful, disciplined effort, and she let herself feel the weight of it one more time. Then she set the book aside, opened her laptop again, and got to work. Because Yoona Seo thought she had sent a photograph to a powerless wife, and Shin Do-hyun thought he had found a clean channel into one of Seoul's most protected empires. And somewhere behind both of them, someone thought that the right personal pressure applied to the right person would crack open a dynasty. They had all made the same mistake. They had looked at Amara Brooks and seen only what she had chosen to let them see. She worked until 4 in the morning, not frantically. There was nothing frantic about the way Amara worked. She moved through information the way a surgeon moves through a body, precise, unhurried, always knowing where the next cut would fall before she made it. By the time the first pale light started showing at the edges of the Seoul skyline, she had 3 separate documents open on her encrypted laptop and a 4th running on a tablet she kept in the false bottom of her home office cabinet. Taehyun slept 12 feet away, behind a closed door. She didn't look at the door. Shin Do-hyun's network was bigger than she'd initially estimated. Not enormous, but layered. He ran it through 3 intermediaries, none of whom knew each other, which meant he'd had serious help designing it. That was the detail that kept snagging her attention. A mid-level information broker in Seoul's underground didn't build a 3-layer firewall without guidance from someone who'd already learned why single-layer systems fail. Someone had taught him. Or someone had built it for him. She flagged that. Sent a secondary inquiry through a channel that would take longer but run deeper. At 4:12, she closed everything, locked the cabinet, and went to the bedroom. She undressed in the dark. Taehyun's breathing was slow and even. She lay down on her side of the bed and stared at the ceiling and did not sleep for a long time. I was up at 7. She heard him before she saw him. The sound of the shower, then the specific cadence of his morning routine, so familiar after 3 years that she could track it without opening her eyes. Razor, cologne, 2 applications, wrists first. The 3rd drawer of the wardrobe, which always caught slightly before it opened. She was dressed and in the kitchen when he came out. "You're up early," he said. He sounded slightly surprised. "I have a meeting at 9. She handed him coffee without being asked. The gesture was automatic. She watched him take it, watched his hands wrap around the mug, and she thought about the photograph again. Him, background, cufflinks, unhurried. And she felt the ache move through her chest, and then she let it go. "What meeting?" he asked. "The Lim Foundation Board." She turned back to the counter. "Quarterly review." He made a sound of vague acknowledgement. She could hear him scrolling through something on his phone. She kept her back to him and focused on the texture of the counter under her fingertips. Cool marble, faint grain, real and solid and present. "I might be late again tonight," he said. She waited exactly 1 second. "Okay." Another pause. She heard him set the mug down. "Amara." "Are you sure you're all right? You seemed—" He stopped. She turned then, slowly, and looked at him across the kitchen. He was watching her with an expression she recognized, a specific kind of guilt that hadn't quite admitted itself to itself yet. Not shame. Guilt. There was a difference. Shame knew what it had done. Guilt was still trying to decide whether it needed to. "I'm fine," she said. Her voice was flat and even, and she watched the expression on his face flicker. "I slept badly. It's nothing." He held her gaze for a moment. Then he nodded. He picked up his jacket from the back of the chair, kissed her on the cheek. She held still for it, didn't lean in, didn't lean away. And he left. She stood in the kitchen listening to the elevator descend. Then she picked up her second phone and called the one number she'd been putting off calling. It rang twice. Then, "I was wondering when you'd reach out." Noah Kingston's voice was the same as it always was. Low, unhurried, with that specific New Orleans flatness that never fully left him, even after 15 years of international work. He was 53, one of the few people alive who had known Amara since before she was who she was now, and one of the fewer still who had any accurate picture of both versions. "How much do you know?" she asked. "Enough to be concerned, not enough to act without your read on it." "Shin Do-hyun. I have a file on him. His network is layered. Someone built it for him." A short pause. "Yeah, I clocked that too." Another pause, longer. "Amara, how are you doing? Not strategically, actually." She was quiet for a moment. Outside, Seoul was fully awake, the noise of it muffled by the glass. "I'm operational," she said. He let that sit for a second. "Right." He didn't push it. That was one of the things she'd always valued about Noah. He knew when a door was closed and he didn't rattle the handle. "I can be in Seoul in 14 hours. Give me 48 first. I need to see what moves before I move." "Understood." He paused again. The girl, Yuna. She's not the architect. No, she's the delivery system. She might not know what she's carrying. Amara looked out the window. That's possible. Doesn't change what she did. No, Noah agreed. It doesn't. She ended the call and stood at the window for 3 minutes, watching a cluster of pigeons navigate a rooftop 2 buildings over with a kind of stubborn, fruitless determination. Then she picked up her bag and went to meet the Lim Foundation board, because the best cover had always been a real life that continued regardless. She met Eunicio 4 days later. Not by accident. Amara didn't do accidents. By the time she walked into the private dining room of the restaurant she'd chosen, a quiet place in Gangnam, the kind of expensive that didn't advertise itself, she had read every piece of intelligence her network had produced on Eunicio in 72 hours of continuous collection. She knew what Yuna ordered at her regular coffee shop. She knew her dress size. She knew the name of the friend Yuna had confided in 2 days ago, whispering into her phone in the bathroom of a nightclub about how she was sure Amara didn't know, how safe it all was, how Taehyun had promised things were progressing. She knew the specific shape of Yuna's confidence and exactly where it was hollow. Yuna arrived 4 minutes late, which was itself a statement. Not enough to be rude, just enough to have not been waiting. She was prettier in person than the photograph suggested, the kind of young woman who wore her face like a weapon because it had always worked before and she hadn't yet learned there were rooms where it didn't. She stopped when she saw Amara already seated, already calm, already in possession of the space. Something moved across Yuna's face. Not fear. Recalibration. "Mrs. Kong," she said. "Miss Seo." Amara gestured to the chair across from her. "Sit down." I ordered water. "If you want something else, tell the server." Yuna sat. She set her bag down with the careful deliberateness of someone trying not to look careful. She was wearing a dress that had cost more than it should have, and the shoes beneath it were the same ones Amara had seen on her social media feed 2 weeks ago, with the caption, "Treating myself," and 300 comments calling her stunning. "I wasn't sure you'd want to meet," Yuna said. "I wouldn't have invited you if I didn't want to meet." Yuna looked at her. The recalibration was still happening behind her eyes. Amara could see it, the slight adjustment of whatever script Yuna had prepared on the way here. She'd been expecting something. Tears, maybe. Anger. Demands. Something that would put Amara in the position of the damaged party and Yuna in the position of the woman with the power. What she was getting instead was Amara quietly pouring water from the carafe like they were colleagues discussing a quarterly report. "I want to be clear," Amara said. "I'm not here to fight with you." Yuna's chin lifted slightly. "Then why are you here?" "Because I think you've been told a version of this situation that isn't complete." Amara set the carafe down. "And I think you're smart enough to want the complete version." "I know what the situation is." "Do you?" Amara looked at her directly, not with hostility, which would have been easier, but with a kind of level attention that was somehow harder to sit under. "Tell me what you think you know." A flicker of irritation crossed Yuna's face. "I think I don't need to justify anything to you." "No, you don't." Amara folded her hands on the table. "But I'm going to say some things, and I'd like you to actually listen to them, because whether you believe me or not, they're true, and you'll eventually need to decide what to do with true information." Yuna said nothing. She picked up her water glass. Her hand, Amara noted, was not quite steady. "My husband has been seeing you for approximately 6 months, Amara said. He's told you that our marriage is dead, that we stay together for appearances, that he feels something real with you that he doesn't feel at home." She paused. "How close am I?" The color in Yuna's face changed. Not flush, something going the other direction. "He told you things about me," Amara continued, "to explain why our marriage exists the way it does. Maybe he said I'm cold. Maybe he said I'm more interested in work than in him. Maybe he implied that he'd been lonely for a long time." She looked at Yuna carefully. "He's not entirely wrong about those things, but there's a version of the truth, and there's the truth. And the version he gave you was assembled to serve a specific purpose." "You don't know what he told me." "Yuna." Amara said her name simply, without weight. "I know almost everything at this point." Something shifted in Yuna's posture. A subtle collapse, small enough that someone less practiced would have missed it. But Amara had been reading rooms since she was 9 years old, had been trained by people who could clock a lie from a change in breathing rate, and she did not miss it. The photograph you sent me, Amara said. Walk me through why you sent it. Yuna's jaw tightened. That's my business. It was sent to my number. That makes it my business too. Amara leaned forward slightly. I'm not asking to punish you. I'm asking because the answer matters. I wanted you to know. Yuna's voice had gone tight and defensive. I wanted you to stop pretending everything was fine and actually see what was happening. Who suggested you send it? A beat. A fraction too long. No one. Amara watched her. Yuna. I said no one. You had a conversation 6 days ago, before the photograph, with someone who advised you that making the situation visible would accelerate things. The stillness that came over Yuna's face was the kind that happens when a person realizes the room they're standing in is larger and stranger than they thought. It lasted less than 2 seconds. Then Yuna's expression hardened, which was the wrong response, the cornered response, and Amara registered it and moved on. I'm not your enemy in this room, Amara said. I know that's a strange thing to hear, but understand, you are not the person I'm worried about. Then who are you worried about? The person who pointed you at me. Yuna stared at her. No one pointed me at anyone. I made my own decision. To send a photograph, yes, the decision was yours. Amara sat back. But the idea that it would help, that it would change something, accelerate something, that was planted, and the person who planted it is using you for something you don't have full visibility into. The silence that followed was different from the ones before it, less defended. I don't know what you're talking about, Yuna said, but her voice had changed. The certainty had gone out of it. Amara looked at her for a long moment. Then she said, You should know who I am. Not who you think I am, who I actually am. I know who you are. You're Tae-hyun's wife. That's one thing. Amara's voice didn't change in volume or temperature, but something in it shifted. A frequency difference, barely perceptible. My name before I was anyone's wife is Brooks. My mother was Celeste Brooks. My grandmother was Dr. Marion Brooks Hahn. She watched Yuna's face for recognition, saw it arrive slow and then sudden, the way recognition does when someone hears a name they've encountered in whispers and didn't fully believe was real. The financial infrastructure that supports Tae-hyun's organization, the international routing, the political coverage in 4 countries, the judicial relationships that have kept his operations invisible for 11 years. None of that was his. It was mine. It was my family's. I brought it to this marriage the way other women bring savings accounts. Yuna had stopped breathing normally. Amara could see it, the shallow rise and fall, too fast. You sent that photograph to destabilize Tae-hyun's wife, Amara said. But there is no Tae-hyun's empire without what I carry, and what I carry doesn't disappear because a marriage ends. She held Yuna's gaze. I'm telling you this not to frighten you. I'm telling you because someone has been using this affair as a pressure point on something much larger than a marriage, and you are standing inside that operation without knowing it. Yuna set her glass down too hard. Water shifted but didn't spill. You're trying to scare me into, I'm trying to give you information that keeps you from being collateral damage. Amara's voice was flat. Not unkind, just irrevocable. What you do with it is your decision, but I'd think very carefully in the next 72 hours about who you've been talking to and what they actually wanted from you. She stood. Left enough on the table to cover the water neither of them had drunk. Picked up her bag. Mrs. Kang. Yuna's voice, smaller now. Amara stopped, but didn't turn. Did he... Yuna stopped, started again. Did he ever actually... I don't know, Amara said. She said it cleanly, without cruelty. And that's one of several things I've recently realized I can no longer afford to wonder about. She left. She walked through the restaurant with the unhurried movement of a woman who had nothing to prove and no one to perform for, and she did not look back. She was in her car, 4 blocks from the restaurant, when her encrypted phone lit up. Not the message she'd been waiting for from Noah's team. Something else. Her intelligence contact in the financial monitoring division, a woman who sent information in 2-word code phrases and had never once been wrong. The message read, kite flying. Amara stared at that for 3 seconds. Kite flying meant money moving, not a routine transfer. Something unusual in scale or direction. Something that had triggered the passive monitoring algorithm she'd installed 18 months ago. She replied, Origin. The response came in under a minute. Domestic, JN Holdings shell. Movement toward Dohyun adjacent account. JN Holdings. She ran the initials through her memory in seconds. Not a long search. Jung Nam. The company's surname prefix used by the Jung family, specifically the younger branch, specifically the branch that had spent 4 years attempting to gain access to shipping channels that ran through her family's network and been refused each time. Her hands were very still in her lap. So there it was. Not a random broker, not opportunism. The Jung family had been probing for an entry point, and they had found one through the oldest channel available, the marriage. Had found Taehyun's weakness and Yuna's ambition and had assembled them into an instrument. They'd spent 6 months building towards something. The photograph was not the goal. The photograph was the trigger, designed to create visible marital conflict, which would then be used to justify a challenge to the syndicate's leadership structure, a destabilized head of household, a credibility gap, an opening, and they'd assumed Amara would behave like a wife. She dialed Noah. He picked up on the first ring. Tell me, Tung family, second branch. It's a leadership play. She kept her voice level because there was no other option. They've been running Dohyun. He's not independent. He's their infrastructure. A beat. How long have they been building this? At minimum, 8 months, maybe longer. She paused. They used Uniseo as a delivery mechanism. I don't think she knows the full picture. Does it matter? It matters for how I handle her. She looked out the car window. A food cart vendor was arguing with someone about change. A small, loud, ordinary disagreement happening 20 feet from where she was rearranging the trajectory of everything. What's your ETA? I can be there in 10 hours if I leave now. Leave now. Done. A pause. Amara. The Jung play. They're going to need a moment of maximum visibility to execute it. A public event, something on record. I know. They'll want Taehyun exposed before witnesses. I know, Noah. A pause. So do you want to take that away from them? He said slowly. Or do you want to use it? She was quiet for a moment. Outside, the vendor and his customer had reached some resolution. Money changed hands. Both parties moved on. I want to use it, she said. I figured. She could hear him already moving, the sound of a bag being pulled from somewhere, a door. I'll have the full Jung network analysis to you by the time I land. She ended the call. She rode the rest of the way home in silence, watching the city through tinted glass. The crush and flow of it. The people who had no idea what was moving beneath the surface of the day. The ordinary, unstoppable machinery of other people's lives proceeding on schedule regardless. When she got home, she stood in the kitchen for a moment. Then she went to the home office, unlocked the secondary cabinet, and pulled out a leather-bound notebook she hadn't opened in over a year. Inside the front cover, in her grandmother's handwriting, were 12 words in Korean that translated roughly as, "The one who defines the battlefield wins before the first move is made." She sat down at her desk and she opened to a blank page. She wrote one word at the top, banquet. Then she began to plan. She was still writing when she heard Taehyun's key in the lock, and she closed the notebook, replaced it with a quarterly financial summary she genuinely needed to review, and she was reading it, actually reading it this time, when he appeared in the doorway. "You're home early," he said. "The board meeting wrapped up." She looked up. He looked tired, the particular tiredness of a man carrying weight he'd chosen not to put down. She wondered, not for the first time, what he actually felt. Whether there was genuine feeling underneath the betrayal, or whether it had simply been convenience. She supposed it didn't change much, but she was human enough to still wonder. "Everything all right?" he asked. "Fine," she said. "You?" He leaned against the doorframe. He had the look of a man on the edge of saying something real. She recognized it, had seen it before in the early years when he used to actually talk to her. The look stayed on his face for 4 or 5 seconds. Then he said, "Yeah, fine," and pushed off the doorframe and went to change his clothes. She watched the empty doorway for a moment. Then she turned back to the financial summary and kept reading, because there was always more to know, and knowing was the only preparation that had ever reliably protected her. 4 days. She would give herself 4 more days to build the full picture. Then she would send the invitations, and Kang Tae-hyun would walk into a room he believed was his, on the arm of a woman he'd spent 6 months lying to, and he would discover in front of every person who had ever mattered in his world exactly how completely he had misunderstood the life he was living. But that night, in the apartment that still smelled like his cologne and her bourbon, and the specific mixture of a shared life that was already ending, Amara Brooks sat at her desk and worked in silence, and the notebook with its single written word sat locked in the cabinet 3 feet away. And the plan that would take everything apart was already, quietly, fully formed. Noah landed at Incheon at 6:14 in the morning, and by 8 he was sitting across from Amara at her kitchen table with 2 cups of coffee between them and a tablet displaying the full Jung family network analysis his team had compiled overnight. He looked the same as he always did, broad-shouldered, unhurried, with the particular stillness of a man who had spent decades in rooms where the wrong movement could end badly. His hair had gone mostly gray in the last few years. It suited him. He had the kind of face that didn't perform anything. What you saw was what was there, which was more than she could say for most people she knew. "Walk me through it," she said. He turned the tablet to face her. Jung Seok-jin, 51, second branch of the Jung family. Grandfather built a legitimate shipping empire. Father diversified into real estate and political infrastructure. Seok-jin took the underground portion and formalized it. Quiet, patient, methodical. Noah tapped a node on the network diagram. "He's been watching your family's operation for at least 4 years. The shipping channel access he tried to buy in 2021, that was him. The proxy acquisition attempt in 2022 through the Singapore holding, him again. I knew about both of those. What you didn't know, what none of us clocked until last night, is that he started the Taehyun play before either of those attempts failed." Noah's finger moved to a different point on the diagram. He wasn't using Taehyun as a backup plan. Taehyun was always the primary vector. The business approaches were cover. They were meant to draw your attention to the front door while he walked in through the marriage. Amara set her coffee cup down. The sound it made against the marble was very precise and very quiet. "How long?" "First documented contact between Seok-jin's intermediary and Taehyun, 4 years and 3 months ago." She looked at the date on the screen. She looked at it for a long moment. 4 years and 3 months ago, she and Taehyun had been married for 8 months. They had been living in Seoul for 5. She had still been completing the final stages of transitioning her family's oversight infrastructure to a new architecture, a period of deliberate reduced visibility, during which she had been, by design, less present in the operational picture than she would normally have been. Someone had known that, had timed it. "Seok-jin knew about my transition window," she said. "Yes." "That information came from inside my family's network." Noah's expression didn't change. "Yes." She stood up. She walked to the window. She stood there for nearly a full minute, and Noah waited, because he had always known how to wait, and eventually she said, "Who?" "We're still—" "Noah. Who?" Another pause. He picked up the tablet, navigated to a secondary file. He turned it to face her when she came back to the table. She looked at the name on the screen. Park Sung-woo, her father's former operations coordinator, a man who had attended her wedding, who had sent flowers when her mother died, who had, in the years since her father's retirement, continued in an advisory capacity to the network her family maintained. She looked at the name for a long time. "He retired 8 months ago," she said. "I signed the transition paperwork myself." He was already working with Seok-jin before he retired. The retirement was an exit strategy. Noah's voice was level and quiet. "Amara, the banquet plan. Seok-jin knows about it." The air in the room changed. Not dramatically. There was no sound, no movement. Just something that shifted in the quality of the silence, the way pressure shifts before weather. "How?" she said. The word came out flat and stripped of everything. Park fed it to them. "We don't know the full timeline of what he passed, but he had access to your communications infrastructure until his retirement, and we found residual traces of passive collection that ran for at least 6 months prior." Noah held her gaze steadily. "The banquet. The invitations. The plan to use Seok-jin's own play as the venue for exposure? They know you know. They've known for at least 4 days." She sat back down. She put both hands flat on the table. She breathed. This was the thing she had never fully prepared for, even knowing intellectually that it was always possible. The moment when the walls you had spent years building turned out to have someone else's door in them. A door you hadn't put there. A door that had been opening quietly, at intervals, for years, letting out exactly as much as needed to be let out. Park Sung-woo, 62 years old. Her father had trusted him with everything. She had inherited that trust without re-examining it, because he had always been there, reliable and familiar, part of the architecture of a life she had grown up inside. She had been careless. The recognition of it was cold and exact. "What does Seokjin do with the information?" she said. Not a question, thinking aloud. "He has two options." Noah folded his hands on the table. "He moves first, disrupts the banquet before it happens, forces the confrontation on his terms rather than yours. Or he lets it proceed but walks in prepared, which means whatever you plan to expose, he's already built a counter-narrative around." What's his counter-narrative on the family seal? Contested provenance. He's already commissioned documentation suggesting your family's claim to the original lineage is partially fabricated. He's had 18 months to build it. Noah's voice carried something that wasn't quite apology but lived in the same neighborhood. It won't hold up to serious scrutiny, but in a room full of people deciding in real time who to believe, it buys him enough doubt to fragment your coalition. She looked at the network diagram. The nodes, the lines between them, the names she recognized and the names she didn't. "He's going to come to the banquet," she said. "Almost certainly." "And walk in knowing I planned it as a trap." "Yes." "And his counterplay is already built." "Yes." She pressed her palms harder against the table. Just for a second, then she released it. "I need to see Tae-hyun," she said. Noah blinked, the first fully unguarded reaction she'd seen from him since he arrived. "Now?" "Tonight." She stood. "Alone." "Amara, if Tae-hyun is deeper in this than we think—" "I know." She picked up her coffee, finished it cold. "That's why I need to see him." She waited until 9 that evening. Tae-hyun came home at 8:40, moving with the slightly compressed energy of a man holding tension in his body. She had noticed that about him in the past few weeks, the way he was carrying something he wasn't releasing. She had read it as guilt. She was no longer confident that was all it was. She was in the living room. She hadn't turned on many lights. The room was dim and quiet, the city visible through the windows, and she was sitting in the chair she rarely sat in, his chair, the one he defaulted to on evenings at home. And when he came through the door and saw her there, he stopped. "Sit down, Tae-hyun." He heard something in her voice. She could see the exact moment he heard it. His posture changed, a barely perceptible shift, the preparation of a person who has been anticipating a particular conversation and suddenly understands it has arrived. He sat on the couch across from her, set his jacket beside him without looking at it. He was watching her the way people watch something they're not certain is dangerous yet. "How long have you been in contact with Young Seok-jin?" she said. The silence lasted 4 seconds. She counted them. "Amara, don't." Her voice didn't rise, didn't shake. "Don't manage this. Just answer me." He looked at his hands, then back at her. His jaw moved once, like he was working out how to begin, and she watched him do it and felt something in her chest that wasn't anger, was older and more exhausted than anger. 3 years, he said. 3 years. Not 4, like Park. 3 years, which meant from almost the beginning of their life and soul. The first year of their marriage, while she was still building what she'd believed was a shared future, he had already been talking to the man who wanted to take it apart. "What did he offer you?" she said. "It wasn't—" He stopped, started again. "In the beginning, it was a business relationship. He had channels I needed. He had access I didn't. And later," Taehyun's hands pressed together between his knees. "Later, he said he could help me establish independent standing, not under your family, not as—" He stopped again. "Not as my husband," she finished for him. He didn't answer, which was the same as answering. She sat with that, the shape of it. 3 years of marriage, and she had believed, in her more honest moments, that he sometimes felt diminished by the invisible weight of what she carried. She had told herself it was her job to make him feel like a partner, and she had tried, and apparently the trying had been nowhere near enough, and he had gone looking for another way to feel like a man who wasn't standing in someone else's shadow. She understood it. She wished she didn't, but she did. Understanding it didn't change anything. "Did you know about Yuna and the photograph?" she said, before she sent it. A different kind of pause. Shorter. No. The truth, Taehyun. I swear to you I didn't know she was going to. He pressed his hands against his face for a moment, rubbed hard. Seokjin told me it was time to accelerate a transition. I didn't know what form it was going to take. But you knew something was coming. He lowered his hands. His face looked scraped clean in the dim light. The glossy confidence entirely gone. Nothing left but the actual man underneath it, who looked smaller and more tired than she'd expected. Yes, he said, and you let it. I thought... He stopped. I thought if there was a visible breakdown, it would give me grounds to restructure the financial agreements, establish my own... Stop. She said it quietly. He stopped. I need you to understand something very clearly, not as an accusation, as information. She looked at him steadily. Every organization that answers to you, every political relationship, every international partnership you believe is yours. I need you to tell me specifically which ones you established yourself, from contact to close, without my family's infrastructure. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, in a voice that had lost every last trace of its usual assurance, the Busan port operations, the 3 northern distributors. 3 things. Out of 47 active relationships she could list from memory. That's what's yours, she said. That's the accurate picture. He looked at her. He looked like a man who had been given a dose of something he'd thought was medicine and was only now feeling what it actually was. Seokjin told you that you could build independent standing, she said. He was using you, Taehyun. He needed you to destabilize our marriage so he could position himself as the stabilizing alternative. He never intended to give you independent power. He intended to absorb what you had access to and cut you out once the transition was complete. She held his gaze. You were the instrument, not the beneficiary. The silence that followed was the heaviest one of the evening. She could see him processing it, the way a person processes a betrayal that they were, to some degree, complicit in. Worse than being used. Being used badly, toward an end that was never what they'd been promised. Amara, he said. His voice had changed completely. No strategy in it now, no management, just the raw sound of a man at the bottom of something. Don't apologize right now. She stood. I don't need that right now. I need to know something else. She moved to the window, looked out. Seokjin knows about the banquet. He knows I was planning to expose him there. He has a counter-narrative already built. She turned back to face Taehyun. What does he not know? What have you held back from him that he would not expect? Taehyun looked at her, really looked at her, the way she realized he hadn't in a very long time, with the full attention of a man who had nothing left to protect. He doesn't know about the prosecutor general's connection, Taehyun said slowly. I never told him. I didn't know if I could trust him with it. Amara went still. Which connection? Jung-min Jai, the prosecutor general. Taehyun's voice was careful now, like he was handling something fragile. He was your father's appointment, wasn't he? I always assumed he was yours, but Seokjin never asked, and I never brought it up. She processed this. Jung-min Jai, not related to Seokjin's family, the surname a coincidence, had been appointed to his position through a coalition her father had spent 6 years building. She had maintained that relationship, quietly and separately from the rest of the network infrastructure. It lived in a part of her operational structure that Park Sung-woo had never had visibility into because she had compartmentalized it the year before Park's access was established, as a matter of routine caution. Seokjin didn't know. It was not a complete solution, it was a thread, the kind of thread you followed when everything else was gone. A single unexploited asset inside a situation that had otherwise been thoroughly compromised. She looked at Taehyun for a long moment. He was still sitting on the couch with his jacket beside him and nothing left on his face but the kind of tired that doesn't get fixed by sleep. Go to bed, she said. Don't contact Seokjin. Don't contact anyone. Don't tell anyone what we discussed tonight. Amara, I'm not done deciding what to do with you. She said it without heat, which was somehow worse than anger would have been. But right now, the most useful thing you can do is be completely still and let me work. He nodded. He picked up his jacket. He stood and he looked at her across the dim room, and there was something in his face that she might have, in a different life, called grief. She noted it. She let it exist without responding to it. Then he went to the bedroom and she stood at the window alone. She called Noah at 10:45. "Youngmin Jai," she said when he picked up. A pause. She heard him recalibrating. "The prosecutor general." "Seokjin doesn't know about our connection to him. Park never had visibility into that channel." "You're sure?" 90%. She watched the city. "Which is the best number I have right now." "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking the banquet still happens." She pressed one hand against the window glass. Cool, solid, real. "But not the way I planned it. Seokjin is walking in prepared to counter the exposure play, so I don't give him the exposure play." "Then what do you give him?" She was quiet for 4 seconds. Then, "A different room than the one he thinks he's walking into." Meaning I've been building the wrong kind of trap. She pulled her hand from the glass. "I built something that shows people what Seokjin is. I need to build something that makes Seokjin show them himself." Noah was quiet for a moment. "That's a harder architecture." "I know. It requires a provocation he can't resist." "I know, Noah." "What's the provocation?" She looked at her own reflection in the dark window. Her face, her eyes, the specific expression she wore when she had committed completely to something. "Me," she said. "I give him me. I give him a version of events in which I've lost, in which the banquet is not a trap, but a genuine collapse. Taehyun publicly siding with him, the family seal's provenance genuinely in question, my position destabilized enough that Seokjin believes the room is his for the taking. You'd need Taehyun to perform against you, in front of everyone." "Yes." "And you trust him to do that?" She considered the question fully, the real version of it. "I trust that he has no other viable option," she said, "which is close enough. And when Seokjin makes his move, when he steps into what he thinks is an opening, Youngmin Jae will be in the room." She moved away from the window toward her desk. "Not as a guest, as an investigator. With documented evidence of 4 years of structured infiltration of a protected criminal organization, financial records of the Young family's underground operations, and testimony from Park Sung-woo that I will have obtained before the banquet." "Park isn't going to give you testimony voluntarily." "No," she said. "He isn't." She sat down, pulled the locked cabinet open, lifted out the leather notebook, opened it to the page with the single word she'd written 4 days ago. "But he's going to give it to me." She crossed out banquet and wrote beneath it, in smaller letters, "Controlled demolition." "I need 72 hours, she told Noah. "For what part?" "All of it." She picked up a pen. "I need Park's location. I need Youngmin Jae briefed in person, not by phone. I need a secondary event space booked under a false name, not the original venue, somewhere Seokjin's surveillance won't already be covering." She began writing in the notebook, quick and precise. "And I need something that puts Yoona Seo out of the blast radius entirely, because she wasn't the architect, and I won't let her be the casualty. She's a complication. She's a young woman who got used as a message delivery system by people who never told her what the message actually meant." Amara kept writing. "Get her out of Seoul. Somewhere she can decide what to do next without anyone else making the decision for her." A pause. "You're going to a lot of trouble for someone who sent your husband's mistress photo to your personal phone." "I know," she said. "Don't read into it." He almost laughed. She could hear it not quite happening. 72 hours, he said. "I'll have Park's location in 3. "Good." She ended the call. She sat at her desk with the notebook open in front of her and the pen in her hand and the specific quality of silence that exists at 11 o'clock in an apartment where 2 people who no longer trust each other are each pretending to sleep. She looked at the 2 words she'd written. Then she turned to a new page and began working out the full architecture of what came next. Who stood where? Who said what Seokjin would see and what he wouldn't, the exact sequence of events that would make a man who believed he had already won walk forward confidently into the moment he lost everything. She worked until 2 in the morning. Her hand was cramping by the end. She didn't stop until every piece was placed. Then she closed the notebook, locked the cabinet, turned off the desk lamp, and sat for a moment in the dark. Somewhere in the city, Young Seok-jin was sleeping with the comfortable confidence of a man who believed he had already seen the battlefield and already won. He did not know that the woman who had just redesigned the entire operation against him was sitting 42 floors above Seoul in a room that had stopped feeling like home, still and awake, and no longer even slightly interested in being underestimated. She stood. She went to the bedroom door. She put her hand on the frame but didn't push it open. Then she went to the couch, pulled a blanket from the back of it, and lay down in the dark. And for the first time in a week, she slept. Not well, not long, but she slept. Because she had learned early that exhaustion was its own kind of enemy, and she had far too much work left to do to hand that enemy a weapon. Park Sung-woo lived in a quiet neighborhood in Mapo-gu, in a house that was too modest for a man who had spent 30 years coordinating the financial architecture of one of Korea's most protected criminal dynasties. That modesty was itself information, the kind of information Amara had not, until 72 hours ago, thought to read correctly. Noah found him at 6 in the morning. Not at the house. At a small jigai restaurant 4 blocks away, where Park apparently ate breakfast alone every day, with a newspaper he held up like a screen between himself and the world. Amara walked in at 6:17. She sat down across from him before he registered she was there, and by the time he lowered the newspaper, she was already looking at him, and she had been looking at him long enough that the expression on her face was entirely settled. Park Sung-woo was 62 and looked it. A broad face, gray at the temples, with the careful, neutral expression of a man who had spent decades in rooms where the wrong reaction could cost someone something. He was good at neutral. He had always been good at neutral. She understood, looking at him now, that she had mistaken competence for loyalty for 30 years. "Amarasi," he said. His voice was even, almost. "Put the paper down," she said. He set it on the table. He folded his hands. His eyes moved once, a quick calculation, left to right, taking stock of who else was in the restaurant. She knew what he found. Noah by the door, and 2 other people who were not eating with the relaxed posture of people who had simply wandered in for breakfast. Park looked back at her. His jaw tightened slightly. "You didn't need to come yourself." "I wanted to." She kept her voice low and level. The restaurant's other patrons, 2 elderly men at a corner table, a young woman reading something on her phone, were not paying attention. "I wanted to see your face when I told you what I know." He didn't respond. His hands on the table were completely still, which told her something. A man who was scared showed it in his hands, in the small, unconscious movements. Park's stillness was chosen. He was controlling it. That was different. "How much are they paying you?" she said. "I don't—" "Park." She said his name quietly, and it was enough. He stopped. "I have the financial records. I have the intercepted communication logs. I have timestamps and account numbers and the specific routing sequence you used for the transfers, which I recognize because it's the same routing architecture I taught you to use in 2009. She let that sit for a moment. "So don't waste what time you have left on denial." He looked at her. Something moved in his face. Not guilt, not quite. Something more complicated. The expression of a man who had made a choice a long time ago and had since had to live inside it. "Your father," he said and stopped. "My father trusted you completely." "Your father—" He pressed his lips together, started again. "Your father built an empire and then handed it to a 28-year-old girl and expected the rest of us to simply continue serving." The evenness in his voice had developed a crack in it, something underneath pushing through. 30 years I gave to that family. 30 years. And when he stepped back, he didn't consult me, didn't discuss transition. He simply told me I would now report to you. And that was worth selling us to Young Seok Jin. I didn't sell anyone. His voice went sharp and then he pulled it back. I redirected. I made an arrangement with people who were building something new, something that didn't require me to be... He stopped. "Subordinate," she said. "To me." His jaw was tight. "You were 28. I'm 41 now. You've been running this for 4 years. She leaned forward slightly. What you feel about being asked to report to a woman younger than you is your business. What you did with that feeling is mine. She held his gaze. Seokjin is going to lose. I need you to understand that before we discuss what happens to you. What he built using your access is not going to hold. The architecture is compromised in ways he doesn't know yet, and I have a relationship with the Prosecutor General's office that he has no counter to. She watched his face process this. You can be on the losing side of this when it ends, or you can make a different choice in the next 10 minutes. Park looked at her for a long time. The 2 elderly men in the corner called for more banchan. The young woman by the window turned a page, The jigai bubbled softly in the kitchen somewhere. "What kind of choice?" he said. "Full documentation. Everything you passed, every meeting, every channel, signed and witnessed." She held his gaze. "In exchange, you go somewhere quiet. Not prison. Not—" She paused. "The alternative. You simply stop existing in this world and start existing in a different, much smaller one." He looked at his folded hands. He looked at them for almost a full minute. She let him. Seokjin will be unable to act on anything by the time this is over," she said. "That's a guarantee, not an estimate." Another silence. Then Park Sung-woo unfolded his hands, placed them flat on the table, and said, "I'll need immunity documentation before I sign anything." "Noah," she said, without raising her voice. Noah crossed the restaurant and set a folder on the table. What? She had the documentation by noon. She spent the afternoon with Jung Min-jae. The Prosecutor General's office occupied a building in central Seoul that projected institutional gravity, all stone and right angles, the architecture of a place designed to make people feel the weight of accountability before they got inside. Amara had been in this building twice before, both times through a side entrance that most people didn't know existed, which told you something about the nature of the relationship. Jung Min-jae was 67, lean and precise, with the bearing of a man who had navigated 35 years of Korean legal politics without once losing his sense of which way the current was actually running. He had a face like old wood, dry, hard, deeply grained. He shook her hand when she came in and didn't waste time on pleasantries, which she appreciated. "You're going to give me Young Suk-jin," he said. "I'm going to give you 4 years of documented infiltration, financial records of underground operations across 3 jurisdictions, and a signed statement from his primary intelligence asset." She sat down, set Park's documentation on his desk. "What I need in return is a specific kind of presence at a private event in 4 days." He opened the folder. He read in the methodical way of someone who had been trained to actually read things rather than skim them. She waited. Outside his window, Seoul moved through a gray midday with its usual unstoppable efficiency. "This is enough," he said finally, "to open a formal investigation. I need more than an investigation. I need an arrest capability, ready to execute the same night as the event." He looked up at her. "You want him taken at the banquet. I want him to walk into what he believes is a victory and walk out in custody." She held his gaze. "Can you build that in 4 days?" He tapped the edge of the folder against his desk twice. A thinking gesture. She recognized it from both times she'd sat in this office before. "The venue will need to be agreed upon by my team. I need sightline access." "The venue changed. I'll have the new address to you by tomorrow morning." He nodded, slowly. "The Jung family has political coverage. Second tier but functional. Whatever I execute needs to be clean enough that it holds when they push back." "Park's testimony plus the financial records constitutes a clean foundation," she said. "The political coverage collapses when the economic infrastructure collapses. They're not loyal to Seokjin. They're loyal to what he funds. And when the funding stops, they become unavailable very quickly." She stood. "I need your confirmation tonight." He looked at her once more, a long, assessing look, the kind that had probably made many people in many rooms uncomfortable over the years. It didn't make her uncomfortable. She'd grown up around men who looked at things that way. "Confirmed," he said. The next 72 hours were the kind of work that existed in the space between sleep and thought, a continuous, grinding forward motion that required everything she had and offered nothing back. She ran on coffee and the specific adrenaline that comes not from excitement, but from necessity. She ate because Noah put food in front of her and she understood it was required. She slept in 4-hour intervals and came back to the desk each time slightly more hollowed out, slightly more distilled into pure function. She rebuilt the banquet from the ground up. New venue, a private dining facility in Yongsan she had used once 3 years ago for a different purpose, large enough for 60 guests. With 3 separate entrances and a security infrastructure she could control entirely. New invitation sequence. Not her name on the paper, but a trusted intermediary. The approach indirect enough that Seokjin's surveillance would flag it later, rather than sooner. The guest list required the most care. She needed the right witnesses, people whose presence would give the evening the institutional weight that made what happened there irrevocable. Political figures, yes, but specific ones. those whose allegiance was to stability and legitimacy rather than to any particular power arrangement. Heads of organizations who had worked adjacent to both her family and the Jung family over the years and would therefore understand immediately the significance of what they were watching. 3 journalists, not to publish anything that night, but because journalists in the room changed the calculation for everyone else in it. She rebuilt the sequence of revelations in a different order. Seok-jin knew the original plan. The original plan was now a decoy, a shape he'd walked into the room prepared to counter. So she built a new sequence that didn't begin with exposure. It began with apparent capitulation. Tae-hyun was the hardest part. She sat across from him the evening before the banquet at the kitchen table. Just the 2 of them. No Noah, no documentation on the table between them. Just 2 people in a marriage that was ending, trying to accomplish one more thing together. "You understand what I'm asking you to do," she said. He had his hands around a coffee cup. He hadn't touched the coffee. He was looking at the table surface. "You want me to stand beside Seok-jin when he arrives. Publicly endorse his position. Make it appear that you've lost the room. Make it appear that the marriage breakdown was his entry point and it worked. That I'm isolated. That the power transfer is already in motion. And when he moves on it, Young Min-jae's team executes. Seok-jin is in custody before he understands what happened." She held Tae-hyun's gaze. "Then you step back, away from Seok-jin's side and away from mine. The room sees it, sees you standing with neither of us. That's the position I'm leaving you in. Not destroyed, not vindicated, simply present." "Why?" He looked up. His eyes were tired and direct and stripped of everything that usually sat on top of them. "Why not burn me with him? You have enough." She looked at him for a moment. "Because burning you gives Seok-jin's lawyers something to work with. A jilted spouse. A conspiracy narrative. I need tonight to be clean." He held her gaze. "That's the strategic reason." "Yes." "Is there another one?" She was quiet for a few seconds. "You told me about the prosecutor general's connection. You didn't have to. That was—" She stopped, considered. "That was a choice that cost you something, and it gave me the peace I needed. I'm not unaware of that." He nodded slowly, looked back at the coffee cup. "If I'd been honest with you, 3 years ago, if I'd told you I felt—" "Don't," she said, not harshly. "We can't build anything useful on that right now." "No." He wrapped both hands around the cup. "No, I know." He exhaled heavily. "I'll do it. Tomorrow night. Whatever you need me to say, I'll say it." She stood. "Noah will brief you on the sequence in the morning. Follow it exactly. Don't improvise." "Amara." He said her name like it meant something, which she supposed it still did, even now, even here. She stopped, didn't turn. "I'm sorry. I know it doesn't change anything, but I am." She stood still for a moment with her back to him. Then she walked to the office and closed the door. She stood on the other side of it in the dark for a few seconds. Breathed. Felt the weight of everything that had accumulated over 3 years pressing through the door between them. Acknowledged it. Named it. Let it exist. Then she turned on the light and went back to work. Oh. The night of the banquet, it rained. Not dramatically. Seoul in November didn't do dramatic rain. It did cold, steady gray rain that turned the streets to mirrors and made the city look like it was being viewed through warped glass. Amara stood at the window of the venue's private preparation room and watched the cars arrive below, and felt the particular quality of calm that had always come to her at the moments of maximum commitment. The stillness on the other side of doubt, when doubt was no longer a useful thing to carry. She was wearing black, not as a statement, simply because black was the color she thought clearly in. Noah came in at 7:40, 20 minutes before the first guests were scheduled. He was dressed well. Noah always dressed well at events, a habit from his years doing security work for people who moved in rooms where appearance was information. He stood beside her at the window and looked at the rain. "Min-jae's team is in position," he said. 3 plainclothes at the entrance, 2 inside the kitchen corridor, a rest team and vehicles on the north side. Good. Seok-jin's convoy was tracked leaving his residence 12 minutes ago, ETA 22 minutes. And Tae-hyun, already inside, he's at the bar. He looks... Noah paused. He looks like a man who's made a decision and is living inside it. He'll hold. She nodded. Yuna is on a flight to Jeju, Noah added. Departed an hour ago. The new identity documentation is waiting for her at the address I provided. She has resources, enough to make a different kind of start. Amara looked out the window. A car pulled up below. She could see the top of an umbrella, a figure moving quickly toward the entrance. Does she know it came from me? No. Good. They stood in silence for a moment. Rain hit the glass in small, irregular percussion. When this is over, Noah said carefully, what do you actually want? She considered the question, the real version of it, not strategically. Something I haven't figured out yet, she said, which is unusual for me. Yeah. A pause. I've known you a long time. I know. I've watched you build things. I've watched you protect things. He was looking at the window, not at her. I've never once watched you want something just for yourself. She didn't answer. He hadn't quite asked a question. Guests are arriving, she said. He nodded. They went back in. By 8:15, the room was 3/4 full and running at the specific frequency of 60 powerful people in an enclosed space. A low, dense hum of conversation. The particular alertness that comes from being in a room where everyone understands that the evening matters without knowing precisely why. Amara moved through it with practiced ease. She spoke to each person she needed to speak to in the right order. The 3 politicians she needed anchored to the institutional narrative before anything else happened. The 2 organization heads who would set the read for everyone else in the room. The journalists she'd placed at a table near the back where they had sightline access to the entire floor. She was speaking with Representative Cho, a careful man, scrupulously centrist, the kind of political figure whose endorsement of a version of events would make it the official version, when Young Seok-jin arrived. She felt him before she saw him. The room changed when he walked in, a subtle shift in the current, the way it always does when a person who carries real power enters a space and other people unconsciously register it. She kept her attention on Representative Cho for 4 more seconds, finishing her sentence, letting the conversation close cleanly. Then she turned. Seok-jin was 51 and looked capable, not large but dense with the specific energy of a man who had spent decades making decisions and watching them execute correctly. He was dressed precisely, moving through the entrance with a group of 3 men she recognized as his senior associates. His eyes swept the room quickly and found her immediately, which she had expected. For one instant, their gazes met across 60 feet of candlelight and conversation. He smiled. Not broadly, just enough. The smile of a man who believes he has already seen the battlefield. She held his gaze for 2 seconds. Then she looked away first. She needed him to believe that was concession. Taehyun appeared at Seok-jin's elbow within 30 seconds, timing they'd rehearsed. She watched from her peripheral vision as Taehyun shook hands, leaned in to say something, guided Seok-jin toward the east side of the room where the senior guests were clustered. Taehyun's body language was confident, slightly proprietary, the posture of a man acting as host in his own domain. She saw Seok-jin read it and relax another fraction. Good. She excused herself from Representative Cho and crossed to the bar. She ordered water. She stood with her back slightly to the room and watched the room in the mirror behind the bottles. Seok-jin was working efficiently, greeting people he knew, being introduced to others, the practiced social movement of a man who understood that power in a room like this was established through accumulation. Every handshake was a small claim. He was claiming the room piece by piece. She let him. At 8:45, dinner was announced. Guests moved toward the tables. Amara was already seated when Seok-jin found his place. She'd arranged the seating so that he was 3 positions to her left, close enough for direct address, far enough that the distance itself read his statement. He sat. He glanced at her. She was looking at her water glass. Soup arrived. Conversation resumed at table volume. 3 minutes passed with the ordinary machinery of a formal dinner. Spoons, murmured exchanges, the clink of a glass. Then Seok-jin said, from 3 positions away, at a volume precisely calibrated to carry to both her and the immediate surrounding guests. Mrs. Kang, I want to say, I think it's admirable that you've chosen to continue hosting these gatherings despite everything. The table went slightly quieter. Not silent, just the natural reduction in noise that happens when people register that a direct address has been issued. Amara set her spoon down. She looked at him. I'm not sure what you mean by that, Mr. Young. Only that transition periods are difficult. He held her gaze with the easy confidence of a man delivering a speech he'd prepared. For anyone in a leadership position, the personal complications you've been navigating lately. My marriage, you mean, she said. A beat. He had not expected her to name it that directly. She watched him recalibrate by a fraction. I only meant, my marriage is ending. She said it to him and to the table and to the room, which had now gone noticeably quieter, other conversations pausing to catch what was happening at the head table. That's not a secret. I don't think anyone here is surprised. She looked around the table, unhurried, inclusive, like she was simply completing a thought. What I think might be surprising is the reason. She reached down and picked up the small device she had placed beneath the lip of the table 3 hours before the first guest arrived. She pressed a single button. The screens, 4 of them, mounted at the cardinal points of the room, which the guests had assumed were decorative or for later use, came to life. What they showed was not what Seokjin had prepared to counter. It wasn't footage of the affair. It wasn't hotel records or private messages. It was a financial diagram, clean, detailed, annotated in both Korean and English, tracing the specific movement of money from Jung Seokjin's holding entities through a series of intermediary accounts into the operational budget of what was labeled, in plain text at the top of the diagram, as an active infiltration operation targeting a protected organization. Beside it, a timeline, 4 years and 3 months long, beginning 6 months before Seokjin had made his first legitimate business approach to her family's network, showing every contact, every transfer, every asset deployed, and below the timeline, Park Sung-woo's signed statement, enlarged, legible from across the room. The sound in the room was not a gasp. It was the sound of 60 people simultaneously reassessing everything they thought they knew about why they had been invited to this dinner. Seokjin's face went through 3 things in quick succession. Amara tracked them all. The first recognition, the recalculation, and then, beneath both, the moment he understood that the counter-narrative he'd built was insufficient, that this room was not what he thought it was. He pushed back from his chair. This is fabricated. His voice was controlled, hard, the voice of a man used to being believed. Park Sung-woo has been a compromised asset for years. Anything bearing his signature should be treated as suspect. You're welcome to contest the documentation, Amara said. Her voice was level. She had not raised it once. There are 3 members of the press in this room who can advise you on appropriate channels. He turned to look. Found the journalists. His face tightened. The financial records, she continued, were obtained through independent forensic accounting and have been submitted to the Prosecutor General's office as of 1400 hours today. She looked at him across the width of the table. Jung Min-jae has been briefed fully. His team has been thorough. The name hit the room differently than she expected. Not just Seokjin, but half the table reacting, the specific reaction of people who understood institutional weight when it was named explicitly. She watched Seokjin feel the floor change beneath him, watched him stand up straighter, which was what people did when they were trying to hold position against a current that was already too strong. You have no standing to, he began. Mr. Jung. She stood. When she stood, the room's attention reorganized itself completely. 60 people finding her, watching her, the way rooms had always organized themselves around the person who was actually in command of the moment. She reached into the interior pocket of her jacket and set a document on the table. It was a single page, and at the top was a seal that several people in the room recognized immediately. She watched them recognize it, watched the recognition move through the table like a current. My family name is Brooks, she said. My mother was Celeste Brooks. My grandmother was Dr. Marion Brooks Hahn, who established the network that has provided the financial infrastructure, political coverage, and operational continuity for 11 separate organizations in this room for 40 years. She held Seokjin's gaze. I have carried that inheritance in this marriage and in this city. The documentation you've been preparing to challenge my family's lineage claim was built on records that my team substituted for the originals 8 days ago. What your experts reviewed was a fabrication. The originals are with Jung Min-jae. The silence was absolute. Seokjin stared at her. The composure was still there. She had to give him credit. It was still there. A man holding himself upright through pure discipline. But behind his eyes, the calculation had gone frantic. She could see it. The rapid internal audit of what was salvageable. Tae Hyun, he said. He turned, looked for Tae Hyun, a natural reflex to finding the asset he'd believed was in his pocket. Tae Hyun was standing 3 feet behind and to Seokjin's right. He had been there for the last 4 minutes, which Seokjin only now registered. He looked at Tae Hyun with the expression of a man expecting confirmation. Tae Hyun held his gaze for a long moment. Then he stepped backward, creating distance, a single deliberate step that placed him clearly, physically, outside of Seokjin's orbit. He said nothing. He didn't need to. Seokjin looked at the step, at the distance it had created. He looked at Amara. He looked at the screen still displaying the financial diagram and the timeline and Park's signature. His hand moved toward his jacket pocket. A reflex. Reaching for a phone maybe, for someone to call. Before his hand made contact, 2 men who had been standing near the kitchen corridor moved into the room, and a third came through the main entrance, and all 3 moved toward Seokjin with the specific quiet efficiency of people who had been waiting for a predetermined signal. Youngmin and Jae's team did not rush. They moved at walking pace. They didn't shout or draw anything. One of them simply said, at a volume that carried in the silence, "Mr. Jung, please come with us." Seokjin looked at the man. He looked at Amara. His composure broke, not catastrophically, not into rage or pleading, but into something more raw and more final. The expression of a man who had believed he was several moves ahead and discovered in a single evening that he had been playing on the wrong board entirely. "You built this in 72 hours, he said. Not a question. Something between accusation and something closer to recognition. "I built part of it in 72 hours, she said. "The rest I built over 41 years. He held her gaze for one more second. Then he turned to the men from Min-jae's team, and he straightened his jacket, and he walked with them toward the exit with the deliberate dignity of a man determined to lose on his own terms, which she respected even now, even here, even after everything. The room was completely silent until the door closed behind them. Then Representative Cho, 3 seats to her left, set down his wine glass with a sound that was almost inaudible and said quietly, "Well," and the room exhaled. Amara sat back down. She picked up her spoon. Her hand was steady. Her heart was hitting hard against the inside of her chest. Not from fear, not from triumph, just from the physical fact of having held that much tension for that long and finally releasing it. She was aware of her own breathing, the specific weight of the air moving in and out, the slight tremor in her left knee that no one could see beneath the table. She ate a spoonful of soup. It had gone cold. It didn't matter. Noah appeared at her shoulder. He leaned down, spoke quietly. Min-jae's team confirmed. They have him. She nodded once. "The press will need—" "Tomorrow," she said. "Give them my representative's card. Tomorrow." He straightened. She heard him move away. Around the table, conversation was beginning again. Carefully, in low tones, the way conversation begins when people are still processing what they witnessed and haven't yet decided what to do with it. She looked at Tae Hyun across the table. He was still standing where he'd been when he stepped back, slightly removed from the nearest group, his hands at his sides. He looked at her and she looked at him, and they held each other's gaze across the remains of a dinner that had just ended a marriage and a 4-year operation and whatever future young Seokjin had been assembling. She looked away first again. Not concession this time, just completion. The simple act of a woman who had finished one thing and was already, even now, even tonight, oriented toward whatever came next. Her soup was cold. She pushed the bowl aside. She folded her hands on the table and sat straight and waited for the room to catch up with what had already been decided. Because some things happened before they happened, and by the time anyone else saw them clearly, the person who had made them happen had already moved on. The room emptied slowly, the way rooms do after something irreversible has happened inside them. People not rushing, not lingering, simply moving with the careful deliberateness of those who understood. They had witnessed something that would require time to fully understand. Coats were retrieved. Goodbyes were made in low voices. Representative Cho paused at Amara's chair on his way out and said nothing, simply placed one hand briefly on the table near her, a gesture that managed to be both acknowledgement and restraint, and then he left. By 10:30, the venue was down to staff clearing dishes and Noah standing near the entrance talking quietly into his phone, and Tae Hyun, who had not moved from his position at the edge of the room. Amara was still at the table. She had drunk the rest of her water. She was looking at the screens, which had gone dark after Minjae's team left, blank rectangles now at the 4 points of the room. She was aware of her own exhaustion in a way she hadn't allowed herself to be all evening. A deep structural tiredness that lived below the muscles, in whatever layer holds the framework together. The kind of tired that doesn't respond to sleep. Taehyun came and sat down across from her. Not in his assigned seat, just the nearest chair. He sat the way men sit when they have nothing left to perform. Elbows on knees, hands loose, weight dropped entirely. She looked at him. Minjae's team will want a formal statement from you, she said, probably within 48 hours. Noah has the contact. Don't go without legal representation. I know. The 3 northern distributors, the ones you established yourself, they're yours. They'll stay yours. She held his gaze. Everything else reverts to the family structure. My attorneys will have the documentation ready by Monday. He nodded slowly. She could see him assembling something. A sentence, probably. Something he'd been carrying all evening. She waited. Was any of it? He stopped. Pressed his mouth together. Started again. The early years. Before Seoul. Was it real for you? She held his gaze for a long moment. Outside the rain was still going, still steady, the city audible through the venue's walls at low frequency. Traffic, distance, the persistent machinery of a place that didn't stop for anything. Yes, she said. It was real. But not enough. It was enough, she said. Until it wasn't. She looked at her hands on the table. That's the honest answer. I don't have a cleaner one. He absorbed that. He looked like a man absorbing something he'd expected to hurt more, and was almost confused by the specific shape of the pain it actually was. Where will you go? She said. Not accusatory, genuinely asking. Busan, probably. The port operations are there. He looked at his own hands. Start with what's actually mine and see what that amounts to. It amounts to something, she said. 3 things built from nothing are worth more than 47 things inherited. He looked up at her. Something moved across his face. Not gratitude, not quite. Something that acknowledged a specific kind of generosity without being certain it deserved it. Amara, he said, I want you to know what I felt was real. It was... He stopped, breathed. It was also insufficient, and I know those 2 things can both be true. She looked at him for a long moment. He was right that both things were true. She had known that since the night she'd sat in the kitchen with a photograph on the counter and a glass of water, and the understanding that truth was rarely simple or singular. Go get some sleep, Taehyun, she said. It wasn't dismissal. It was the closest thing to kindness she had left to give him tonight. He stood. He straightened his jacket out of habit, the same small gesture she had watched him make 1,000 mornings, and then he walked to the exit and through it without looking back. She sat in the empty room for a few minutes after he left. The staff worked quietly around her, gathering glasses, folding napkins, restoring the space to its neutral state as though nothing had happened in it. She watched them work and thought about how that was the job, making a room forget. Noah came back in. He sat down where Taehyun had been. He didn't say anything for a moment. Seokjin is processed, he said finally. Minjae's office confirmed holding. He paused. The young family's legal team made contact with the prosecutor's office within 20 minutes of the arrest. They're already building. Let them build, she said. The foundation is solid. Park's testimony holds? Park is in Jeju by now. The testimony is signed, witnessed, and in 3 separate hands. If anything happens to Park, the release triggers automatically. She had built that architecture the same night she'd gotten his signature, because she had learned from men who had built the same kind of protection for themselves and then watched it fail when they left a single point of control. She had left none. Noah nodded. He was quiet for another moment. What about the network, the operational structure your family maintains? You said it reverts. It never actually left, she said. It was always under the family structure. What reverts is the appearance of it being under Taehyun. The infrastructure itself stays exactly where it's always been. She looked at the dark screens. I need to do a full audit. Find every channel Park touched. Rebuild what needs rebuilding. She paused. That's probably 6 months of work. I can help with the security architecture. I know. She looked at him. I'm going to need you for this, Noah. For the next phase, he held her gaze. You know I'm here. She nodded. She stood up. Her knee had stopped trembling. Her hands were still steady. She was 41 years old and tired in every part of herself, and the room around her smelled like candle wax and expensive wine and the particular residue of an evening that had changed the shape of several people's lives. And she felt, beneath all the exhaustion, something she recognized after a moment as the stripped clean sensation of a woman who has done the thing she committed to doing and is now standing on the other side of it. Not triumph, not relief, something quieter. The sensation of a structure that has been under sustained pressure finally allowed to settle. Let's go, she said. 3 days after the banquet, the story broke. Not from the journalists she'd placed in the room. They had been appropriately careful, appropriately thorough. They had spent 3 days verifying and cross-referencing before anything went to print, which was exactly what she'd wanted. The first story ran on a Friday morning under a financial journalist's byline, focused on the documentary evidence of Young Suk-jin's structured infiltration operation. It was factual, dense, and absolutely devastating. It named Park Sung-woo as a source. It referenced Young Min-jae's office without quoting him. It laid out 4 years of the operation's architecture in language that was accessible without being simplified. By noon, it had been picked up by 6 other outlets. By evening, it was the leading story on every significant news platform in Korea. By the following morning, it had cleared the international wire. Amara read the first story in her kitchen, alone, with coffee that was actually hot this time. She read it carefully. When she finished, she set it down and sat for a moment, and then she made a second cup and went to her home office and started the first day of the audit. She did not read the rest of the coverage. What she'd needed from it was the record. The public, documented, irrevocable record that would make any future attempt by the Jung family to rewrite the narrative prohibitively difficult. The record existed. Everything else was noise. The audit was difficult in the way that foundational work is always difficult. Unglamorous, painstaking, the grinding of gears without visible motion. She spent the first week mapping every communication channel Park had accessed in the last 4 years, cross-referencing against operational logs she pulled from 3 separate archives. She found 7 points of passive collection she hadn't known about. She found 2 that she had known about and had believed were closed that were still marginally active, which was the most troubling discovery. Not because they'd caused damage she could identify, but because it meant her own security assumption had been wrong. She rebuilt those channels from the ground up, brought Noah in for the technical architecture of the new encryption protocols, brought in a woman named Seo Hyun-kyung, a network security specialist she had worked with twice before and trusted as much as she trusted anyone in that specialty, which was carefully and specifically and not completely. She worked. That was what she did in those weeks. She got up and worked and ate and slept and worked again, and the work was real and necessary, and it kept the parts of her that weren't ready to be examined from having to be examined before she was ready. The divorce papers were filed on a Wednesday, 18 days after the banquet. Her attorneys had prepared them efficiently, which she had requested. The terms were what she had outlined to Tae-hyun that night in the venue, clean, clearly delineated, without punitive architecture. He received the 3 operations that were genuinely his. She retained everything that had always been hers. The apartment was hers. She had owned it before the marriage. She signed her copies at the kitchen island, the same counter she had stood at 6 weeks ago with a photograph face down in front of her. She noticed that, noted the specific geometry of it without assigning it more meaning than it deserved. She signed. She had the document sent. She made coffee. She stood at the window with the coffee and looked at Seoul for a while. It was early December by then, and the city had the particular gray beauty of a northern winter. Low sky, bare branches, the lights beginning to matter more at this hour than they did in warmer months. She looked at it and thought about nothing in particular for a few minutes, which was unusual for her, and she let it be unusual without trying to fix it. Her phone rang. She looked at the screen. A number she recognized, her father's direct line, which he only used for things that required his actual voice rather than the intermediary infrastructure they normally used. She picked up. "I heard it went well," he said. He was 74 and his voice had the slight roughness of age in it, but the precision was unchanged. Quan Brooks had spent 50 years building a thing, had spent the last decade carefully removing himself from the center of it, and had never once stopped paying attention. "It went as planned," she said. "Mostly." Park. Yes. A pause. She heard him breathing. I should have seen it. So should I. No. His voice was firm. He was mine. I trained him. I trusted him. That's a failure of my read, not yours. Another pause. Are you all right? I'm operational. Amara. She looked at the window, at the city, at her own faint reflection superimposed on the gray skyline. I'm managing, she said. I'll be better in a few months. The marriage is over, cleanly. She shifted the phone to her other hand. Taehyun played his part at the end. He told me about the prosecutor general connection when he didn't have to. I've treated him accordingly. You're more generous than I would have been. I'm more practical than you would have been, she said, which wasn't quite contradiction. He made a sound that was almost a laugh. Come home for the new year, he said. Your aunt is asking. The house is… He paused. It would be good to have you here. She thought about the apartment, the kitchen, the window she kept standing at, the office where the audit was still ongoing, the city that had been her city for 3 years and now felt like something she was occupying rather than inhabiting. Maybe, she said. Amara. I'll think about it, she said. I mean it. I'll actually think about it. He let that be enough. They talked for a few more minutes, the practical things, the network matters, the specific questions he had about the rebuilt channels. And then they said goodbye with the particular economy of people who have always communicated more in the space between sentences than in the sentences themselves. She set the phone down. She finished her coffee. She went back to work. Noah stayed in Seoul for 6 weeks. He had an apartment he kept for extended stays in Asia, a sparely furnished place in Itaewon that suited the way he lived. Unencumbered, adaptable, ready to be somewhere else on relatively short notice. He came to the penthouse most mornings, sometimes evenings, and they worked through the audit together during the days, and sometimes ate dinner in the kitchen when the work ran late, talking about things that had nothing to do with networks or operations, old cases, mutual acquaintances, the specific absurdities of international travel, the food she missed from New York. She noticed during those evenings that she was less guarded than she was during the working hours. Not careless, just less armored. The way people are with someone who has known them long enough to have already seen the unarmored version and not done anything damaging with it. She noticed it. She didn't do anything with the noticing. She filed it away in the category of things that would require attention when she had the bandwidth for that kind of attention, and she moved on. One evening in late December, they were at the kitchen island. She had made rice and some kind of soup that had turned out better than she'd expected. And Noah was reading something on his tablet, and she was reviewing a channel map, and he said without looking up, "What are you going to do with the apartment?" She looked at him. "What?" "This apartment." He set the tablet down. "After the audit's finished, and you've restructured the governance and done everything else on the list. Are you going to stay here?" She looked around the kitchen, the marble counter, the window, the chair he was sitting in, which had always been hers. She had apparently given it to him somewhere in the last several weeks without noticing. "I don't know," she said. "Fair answer." He picked up his soup. "What about New York?" "What about it?" "Your father's asking you home for the new year." "He called you." "He emails." Noah almost smiled. "He emails like it's 2003, full paragraphs, no subject line. I appreciate it." She looked at the window. It was dark outside. The lights of the city were doing their December thing, brighter, denser, the way a city compensates for shorter days. "I don't know what I want the next thing to look like," she said. It was the second time she'd said something like that. First to Noah, the night of the banquet, and now here, in the kitchen, over soup. She noticed she kept returning to it. The honest admission of not knowing, which for someone who had spent 41 years knowing felt like walking on ground she hadn't tested. "That's different for you," Noah said. "I'm aware." Not a criticism. He was looking at her with the level attention she had always found easy to be under, because it didn't want anything from her. "You've been running at a particular frequency for a long time. The constant orientation toward threat and response. After 6 weeks of that winding down, I'd expect some disorientation." "I'm not disoriented." "No," he agreed. "You're Amara Brooks. You're never disoriented." He paused. "But you're maybe in a room you haven't been in before." She considered that. "That's a fair description." He nodded. He ate his soup. She ate hers. The city did what it did outside the window. After a while, she said, I think I'll go to New York for the new year. 2 weeks, maybe 3. Good. And then I'll come back and finish the audit. Also good. And then, she stopped. I'll figure out the rest when I get to it. He looked at her. Yeah, he said. You will. She called Unicio once. It was 3 weeks after the banquet, on a morning when the audit had produced a particularly tedious segment, and she had needed 20 minutes of something that wasn't a channel map. She had the number from Noah's team, the new one registered under the new identity. It rang 4 times before Una picked up. Yes. The voice was careful, guarded. It's Amara Brooks, she said. I won't keep you long. A long pause. How did you... Una stopped, started again. What do you want? Nothing. I wanted to ask if you're all right. Another pause, longer. I'm in Jeju. I know. Are you all right? The silence on the line had a particular quality to it. A young woman on the other end processing the fact that the person she had expected to be her enemy was asking about her welfare with what appeared to be genuine interest and no apparent agenda. Una started, stopped. I'm figuring things out. Good, Amara said. That's the right thing to be doing. Mrs. Kong, Brooks, she said. Just Brooks is fine. Another pause. I didn't know what I was being used for, Una said. The words came out compressed, like she'd been holding them at pressure. I want you to know that. I thought I was making my own choice. Sending that photo, I thought... She stopped. I know, Amara said. I believe you. That doesn't... Una's voice had gotten tight. That doesn't make it not a terrible thing to do. No, Amara agreed. It was a terrible thing to do. You're right about that. She paused. And you're the only person in this whole situation who seems to actually understand that, which counts for something. A silence. Then very quietly, did he actually... Una. Amara's voice was level and not unkind. He felt something, whether it was love or convenience or something in between, I can't tell you. I stopped being able to read him clearly a long time before I admitted it. She paused. What I can tell you is that he's in Busan now, starting over, and whatever he felt for you was real enough to be something and not real enough to be everything, which is probably the most honest answer available. A long silence. When Una spoke again, her voice was different, younger somehow, or maybe just more itself. I thought I was winning something, she said. I thought I was... I don't even know what I thought I was doing. You were 24 and someone told you that ambition and love were the same thing, Amara said. That's not an unusual mistake, it's just an expensive one. She looked at the window, at the city. You have resources. Use them carefully. Start with something real, something you actually built, not something someone handed you. That's the only kind of thing that holds. Another silence. Then, why are you telling me this? Amara considered the question. The honest answer was complicated. Something about women and the specific way they got positioned against each other by circumstances and men and systems that needed them occupied with fighting each other instead of understanding what was actually happening. Something about 24 years old and the specific kind of loneliness that makes a person easy to use. Something about her own life and the choices she had made and the ones she hadn't. Because someone should, she said. Get some rest, Una. She ended the call. She sat for a moment. Then she went back to the channel map. Park Sung-woo she did not call. She had given him his terms, the smaller, quieter life, and she intended to honor them. He had done 30 years of real work for a family that had not made him feel sufficiently valued, and then he had done 4 years of real damage to that same family for people who had told him exactly what he wanted to hear. Both things were true. She had processed both of them. She did not feel warmth toward him, and she did not feel the urge to make him suffer, and she thought that was probably as much resolution as that situation was ever going to offer her. She locked the apartment in the last week of December. She had a car to the airport. She slept on the plane in a way she hadn't managed to sleep in weeks. Deeply, without interruption, the specific unconsciousness of someone whose body has decided that the emergency is over and has taken the decision into its own hands. She woke up over somewhere in the Pacific and looked out the window at the dark and the cloud cover far below and the occasional star where the cloud thinned, and she sat with that for a while. The stillness of altitude, the strange dislocation of existing between two places, belonging temporarily to neither. She thought about the last 3 months. The photograph. The kitchen at 11:47, the bourbon, the files and the calls and the meetings, and the banquet and Taehyun's face when he stepped back, and Seokjin's face when he understood. The audit. The divorce papers on the same counter. She thought about her grandmother's notebook, the 12 words in Korean. She could recite them from memory, the way she could recite most things that had mattered enough to stay. She thought about 41 years of carrying a particular thing, being a particular kind of woman, capable and precise and always, underneath everything, oriented toward responsibility before herself. She didn't know what she wanted the next phase to look like. That was still true. She had said it twice, and it was still true, and she was beginning to understand that the not knowing was not a problem requiring immediate solution. It was simply where she was. A room she hadn't been in before, like Noah said. A room without a map, which for a woman who had spent 4 decades making maps felt strange and unsteady, and she searched for the right word and found it eventually, somewhere over the Pacific, in the dark, possible. It felt possible. New York came up under the clouds as the sun was rising. She could see the shape of the harbor, the density of the boroughs from this height, the specific character of the light on water that she had forgotten after 3 years in Seoul. She pressed her hand flat against the cold window glass, just for a moment, the pressure of the reel against the palm of her hand. Her father's driver met her at arrivals. She recognized him, an older man, patient, reliable, the kind of person who had been exactly where he was supposed to be for 30 years. He took her bag without being asked. They drove through the city in the early morning quiet. The house in Brooklyn was the same. It was always the same. Her father had never been interested in change for its own sake, had always said that the things worth keeping were worth keeping unchanged. She had pushed against that philosophy her whole life. She understood it better now. Her father was in the kitchen when she came in. I was 74 and moved slower than he used to, and had the particular quality of old men who have stayed mentally sharp, a brightness in the eyes that refused the rest of the body's concessions. He looked at her when she came through the door and didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said, "You look tired." "I am tired," she said. "Sit down. I'll make coffee." She sat at the kitchen table, a different table from the one she'd grown up with, but in the same position in the same room, and the room had the particular smell of all the mornings she had ever spent in it, accumulated and permanent. She put her bag on the chair beside her. She looked at the window, which faced east and had the new sun coming through it at an angle that hit the table in her hands and made everything look, briefly, like something being preserved. Her father set coffee in front of her. He sat down across from her, which was where he had always sat, and he looked at her with the attention of a man who had spent 50 years learning when to speak and when to simply be present. She wrapped both hands around the mug. The warmth of it moved up her palms and into her wrists. "It's done," she said. "Yes," he said. "All of it. Seokjin, Park, the network restructuring." She looked at the coffee. "The marriage." "Yes." "There's still 6 weeks of audit work." "There's always work," he said, not dismissively, just accurately. She looked at him. He looked back at her. 74 years old, her father, with his careful eyes and his patient hands, and 30 years of decisions she had grown up inside without always understanding them, and now understanding most of them, and forgiving the ones she still disagreed with, because that was what time eventually required. "I don't know what comes next," she said. It was the 3rd time she'd said it to someone, and this time it felt less like confession and more like simply information, a fact about her current location. "No," he said. "That's appropriate." She looked at him. "You're not going to tell me what you think it should be." "You're 41 years old," he said. "You just did something that required everything you had and then a little more." He picked up his own coffee. "You're allowed to not know for a while." She looked at the window. The light was doing its morning thing, shifting as the sun moved, the table surface changing under her hands. "Noah is coming to New York in February," she said. "He has business here. We're going to finish the security architecture review." Her father said nothing. He drank his coffee. He had the particular restraint of a man choosing not to say a thing he could see clearly and had decided was not his to name. "He's been a good—" She stopped, started again. "He's been essential to this whole thing, From the beginning. He's always been essential, her father said, neutrally, accurately. She looked at the window. She thought about Noah in her kitchen chair. She thought about 6 weeks of working dinners and the specific ease of being in the same room with someone who didn't require anything from her other than what she actually was. She thought about possible, the word she'd found over the Pacific in the dark. I'm going to sleep for about 12 hours, she said. Good. She stood. She picked up her bag. She paused at the kitchen doorway, turned back. Her father was at the table with his coffee and the morning light and the particular piece of a man who had made most of his decisions and was living inside them. She looked at him for a moment, at the specific face of someone she had known her entire life, who had given her everything she was and also the burden of everything she was, and who looked at her now like both things were true and neither required apology. Thank you, she said. He looked at her. He nodded once. She went upstairs. She slept until evening. When she woke, the room was the amber color of late-day light coming through the same curtains she had slept under as a girl. And for a moment, just a moment, the unclaimed space before full consciousness, she didn't know exactly where she was in the long sequence of her life. She was just awake, just here, just a woman in a room that had always held her. Then she knew. Then she was fully herself again, with all of it. Everything she'd done and everything it had cost and everything she didn't know yet. She lay there for a few minutes. She listened to the sounds of the house, her father somewhere below, the particular creak of the third stair, the refrigerator, the city outside filtered through old walls. She picked up her phone. One message from Noah, sent an hour ago. Flight booked. February 11th. Hope Brooklyn is treating you well. She looked at that message for a moment, then she set the phone face down on the nightstand, which was a different gesture entirely from the one she'd made 6 weeks ago, with a different phone and a different photograph. She got up. She went to the window. Outside, Brooklyn was doing what it always did, dense and alive and unhurried and absolutely itself, refusing to adjust its rhythm for anything or anyone. She put her hand on the glass, cool and solid and present, the way things are when they're real. She stood there until the light finished fading. Then she went downstairs to find dinner and her father, and to begin, carefully and without a map, whatever came next.